Here am I, send me. And this image popped up. And of course, as most of us are aware, in the Old Testament, Christ is portrayed as the Lamb of Judah, and that's been popularized by C.S. Lewis's Narnia stories, where Christ is seen as the lion Aslan. And when I first saw it, to me, this image seemed to be thinking that, the lion is thinking, Christ is thinking, oh boy, here's what I got to work with. But the thing you appreciate about the kitten, small as he is his tremendous enthusiasm and his desire to serve. He's jumping up and down saying, pick me, here I am, send me. All of the great people of God have been filled with a sense of unworthiness or inadequacy for the task. Isaiah was too sinful. Gideon was too fearful. Jeremiah was too young. Mary was too young, and she was a girl. Peter was always saying and doing the wrong thing. Paul was too stubborn and hard-nosed. You can go on and on. All of them have their own shortcomings and inadequacies, and many of those things were true about them. Particularly, I chose the story of Gideon this afternoon because there he is hiding in the wine press. And he sees the backslidden, weakened condition of his day. And he, like so many others, understands that whatever God is calling him to is probably going to be dangerous and not pleasant. We see that in many of the callings of God. The times were daunting, the task could be hard. But like Isaiah, like Gideon, they're saying, I'll go anyway. They had a willingness and enthusiasm to serve God and to be a blessing to others. Larry, the hope for blessing is that you would continue to be real about your abilities and about the challenges of the times that we live in, but that you would continue to find enthusiasm for Christ and a desire to serve his people. That refreshing may come from unexpected directions and sources. It might be a timely word from some member of the church or the community. It might be seeing someone experience change of heart and life. Perhaps it may come in with recurring insight that we walk with Christ in all the ups and downs of living for God and that he's with us on the way. And then I'm thinking, after thinking those things, that maybe the lion in the picture isn't thinking, oh boy, but maybe he's thinking, yes, I can work with this. Because where there's willingness, God can lead and provide. In that vein, the second blessing I'd hope for you is this: that in spite of the challenges, you would again and again discover that God does have a plan. I've always loved the account of Gideon in the book of Judges. When I was a kid in King City, way back in the olden days, we didn't have a movie theater. We only got 2 channels on TV. And so when a local church put on a March break slideshow to attract all the kids in town, we all went. And they told us the story of Gideon. And Gideon's situation in Israel was interesting. They had no weapons. They were outnumbered. The people were badly discouraged. He's hiding in a wine press for fear of the Midianites. And God calls him to beat Israel's enemies. Gideon quite logically protests that it's impossible. And from a human military perspective, he was right. But as the story unfolds, we see that God has a unique strategy. As a few hundred soldiers with trumpets and lamps tricked the Midianites into thinking that they were a vast army and completely routed them in the night. As I said, we're always surrounded by reports and analysts that underscore that these are challenging times. But again and again over the past 4,000 years, we've seen that when the challenges are great, when spiritual ardor is low, and people just don't seem to care about God or God's priorities, God still has a plan. Jesus picked a motley crew of fishermen and activists and tax collectors and turned the world upside down. There were Irish monks who crossed the sea in little round boats to take the gospel to God-forsaken places like Scotland. There was the Reformation, there was the Great Awakening. Some of us experienced this firsthand. Back in the 60s and 70s, with rising tide of secularism, the Jesus movement brought many of us to Christ. I doubt the professors at Knox College back then would have come up with a strategy of young people with long hair and folk music in coffee houses as a means of renewal. But God did. Or think in other parts of the world when the missionaries were kicked out of China. Intense persecution was directed at the church. Who would have thought that God would use house churches and almost completely untrained leaders? The great thing about the way that God works is that he comes up with strategies of blessing that are unique and unforeseen. a unique method for that unique, challenging time. And although sometimes we want to turn those things into methods, God comes up with new strategies all the time. As God says to us in the Psalms, our strength is not in our weapons or our armor, but it's in God. So as you serve, wherever you are in the future, with whatever challenges, may you be blessed to discover that God has a plan to renew and to reach out and draw others into his kingdom. You could go on and on with these blessings, but let me suggest just one more. I would hope that you would experience God's blessing and approbation in the serving. I know, I'm using all my cat lion pictures this afternoon. To me, this one should be captioned, "Hail Mighty Warrior." Now, you could look at this cat and think that he's completely delusional. Or you can see this as a glimpse of how God sees this cat. It's how God greets Gideon when he's there, scared, thrashing wheat in a winepress. It's ironic that the angel says, "Hail, mighty warrior," when he's hiding away, flailing away at the grain. But God knew what Gideon could do with guidance and blessing. We see that affirmation was important in Jesus, too. Part of the dynamic of Jesus' baptism, this is the Sunday that we often mark this, is the high approbation of the Father. No one else, when Jesus was baptized, heard the voice. They saw just an ordinary person coming up out of the water. But Christ heard the blessing. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased." He said it again on the Mount of Transfiguration, and I expect that Christ heard it again and again in prayer and in the midst of joining his Father in his Father's work. "You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased." It reminds one, the Olympics are coming, it reminds one of that famous line from the Chariots of Fire, which apparently wasn't a quote from Eric Liddell, but has certainly described his spirit. When it talked about his victory in all those races and in the 1924 Olympics, "God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure." That was true for his experience as an athlete and as a missionary to China. The support and approbation of other people is good. God sometimes uses that. I know the congregation here at Knox certainly feels that way. You've been a blessing to us in many ways in the past, and they would certainly affirm your calling and your gifts. And I know that the folks in Winnipeg, I'm sorry. You know what I said about that? I have a recurring nightmare that God is calling me to Winnipeg. I wake up in a cold sweat and give thanks that it was a dream. I know the folks in Wingham are doing well in calling you. And I'm sure they will affirm you in the months and the years to come. But regardless of what other people think, regardless of whether things look successful or positive on the outside, I hope that you frequently sense the approval of our Lord, declaring to you by whatever means he uses, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." We indeed are in this presbytery are confident of your gifts and abilities. We look forward to what God is going to do in and through you in the days to come. Now, before we come to the portion of the service where we continue on with the act of ordination, I'd invite us to continue to worship God as we bring to him our afternoon's offerings.